Sometimes we're faced with choices where there just isn't a perfect answer. Every single path forward involves some kind of harm, there's no clean win. So, how are you supposed to decide what to do when any action you take has both good and bad consequences? Well, today we're going to explore a framework designed for exactly these impossible moments. Let's start with a really tough one. A patient is in constant, terrible pain. You can give them a dose of morphine that will bring them relief. But you also know that dose might just speed up their death. So what do? Do you act? And this isn't some abstract thought experiment. This is a heavy, real-world question that doctors and families have to grapple with all the time. These really are what you might call impossible choices. They're situations where one single action creates two very different effects, one that's good and one that's, well, tragically bad. For literally centuries, philosophers have been trying to create some kind of system to help us think clearly when we get caught in these ethical knots. Yeah, this problem is definitely not new. The framework we're talking about goes all the way back to the 13th century philosopher Thomas Aquinas. It's called the principle of double effect, and it's a powerful tool designed to try and bring some moral clarity to an otherwise chaotic situation.
So how does this old principle actually work? Well, the whole thing hinges on one profound, and honestly kind of controversial, distinction. The difference between what you intend to do and what you simply foresee is going to happen.
Okay, so here's the official definition. The principle of double effect lays out a set of tests to figure out if it's morally okay to do something that you know will have a harmful side effect. The absolute keywords there are foreseen but unintended. And this is where it gets really interesting, because this principle puts a huge moral weight on this difference. People who support the principle of double effect argue there's a massive difference between aiming for a result, your intention, and just knowing that a result will probably happen as a side effect, your foresight. One is your goal, the other is the collateral damage you accept, but you don't actually want. So to use this idea correctly, the principle gives us a kind of moral checklist. For an action to be considered okay, it has to pass 4 very specific conditions. Let's walk through this instruction manual together. First, the act itself can't be evil. It has to be either good or, at the very least, neutral. Second, your intention has to be purely for the good outcome. The bad outcome is just a foreseen side effect you're willing to accept. Third, and this is the really crucial one, the bad thing can't be the way you get to the good thing. And finally, number 4, the good you're trying to do has to be big enough to justify the harm that you know is going to be caused. Okay, I know that all might still sound a little abstract, so the best way to really get a handle on this is to apply it to a really high-stakes scenario. We're going to use a classic example from military ethics that makes this principle crystal clear. Okay, so let's compare 2 different kinds of bombers. First, you have the tactical bomber. Their mission is to strike an enemy munitions factory, a totally legitimate military target. But they know, with tragic certainty, that some civilians who live nearby might be killed in the attack. Then you have the terror bomber. They target that civilian neighborhood directly, precisely because killing non-combatants will create fear and help them win.
Now, let's run both of these through our 4 conditions. The tactical bomber, well, they get a check mark on all 4. The act of bombing a munitions factory is arguably neutral in war. The intention is to stop the enemy, the civilian deaths aren't the means to that goal, and the goal is proportional. But the terror bomber, they fail on almost every single point. The act is evil, the intention is evil, and most importantly, those civilian deaths are the direct means to achieving their goal.
And that right there is the core of the whole principle. Think about it. For the tactical bomber, if, by some miracle, all the civilians survived, the mission would still be a success. But for the terror bomber, if the civilians survived, the mission would be a total failure. The harm isn't a side effect. It's the whole point. Okay, let's bring it all the way back to where we started. The doctor giving morphine. Let's run the test. The act of relieving pain, that's good. The intention, it's to relieve pain, not to cause death. Is the death the means of relieving the pain? No, the morphine is. And finally, is the relief from agonizing suffering proportional to the foreseen risk? You could definitely argue that it is. So, under this principle, the doctor's action could be seen as permissible. But it's not quite that simple. This principle is a very sharp tool, and it comes with some serious warnings. In fact, it's faced a ton of criticism for being, well, maybe a little too neat and tidy for the messiness of the real world. Critics, especially a group called consequentialists, argue that all this talk about intention is just a fancy distraction. They say a bad outcome is a bad outcome, period. regardless of what was going on in the person's head. And others point out that the line between intending something and just foreseeing it can get really, really blurry. I mean, can you truly know something is an inevitable result of your actions without, on some level, intending for it to happen? And that leads us to the most serious charge of all. As the critic Alison Hoyt puts it, the principle of double effect can be twisted. It can become a way for people to fool themselves, a loophole for military or political leaders to justify horrific outcomes by just saying they were unintended side effects. So here's the bottom line. The principle of double effect gives us a structure. It forces us to look in the mirror and confront our own motives. It makes us ask, what are we really trying to accomplish with our actions? It's a powerful lens for examining our own intentions.
But at the exact same time, that total reliance on intent is also its greatest weakness. Because intent is invisible, it's locked away inside someone's mind, it opens the door for manipulation and for just rationalizing bad behavior. It's a tool that can be used for clarity, sure, but it can also be used for justification. And that leaves us with one last, really difficult question. This entire ethical framework is built on our ability to know what someone's true intentions are, both in other people and, maybe even harder, in ourselves. In a complicated world full of mixed motives and self-deception, can we ever really be sure?